Hi, I'm Sarah from The Upcoming. A pleasure to be able to speak to you today. I guess maybe you could just begin with a brief introduction to a sudden glimpse to deeper things. For people who don't know anything about this documentary, what can they expect?
They can expect to meet a really inspiring person. There are lots of famous artists of the 20th century, like Pablo Picasso, and they changed the world. But this is a quiet woman who didn't try to change the world, but painted for decade after decade. And in her art, I think we can see something about what it's like to feel alive.
And maybe you can tell us a bit about how the documentary came about, your sort of very personal connection to her work, but also, I guess, a desire for a spotlight on her work, offer her that appreciation, and give voice to her legacy in a way that hadn't been properly, perhaps, within her lifetime.
I think so. I mean, this is the theme of this film in some way is kind of feminist because this is an artist who was not fully appreciated in her own time. It's also about neurodiversity, which we're very interested today. She was synesthetic and knew that from the 1940s or something, which is so interesting. It's also a film that touches on the climate emergency, unfortunately, because one of the central experiences of her life was in 1949, she climbed a glacier, was overwhelmed by it, and painted that experience for decades and decades. That glacier is now gone. So I think that the time has come to look back at this great artist through these different lenses of our 21st century and actually see how spirited she was, how great an artist she was, but also how she can affect us today.
I guess, like a lot of your work, it doesn't sort of follow maybe some of the conventions we're used to when we're watching a biopic or something of this nature, not necessarily the talking heads and sort of a linear chronology.
Yeah.
But instead, we're steeped in her artwork, her notepads, using 16mm cameras, to capture some of the outdoor moments. So maybe you can talk a little bit about your sort of cinematic approach and the tools that you have at your disposal to put this film together.
I've always been interested in innovation. I like mainstream work, but I'm particularly interested in the films and the filmmakers who try to refresh the language of cinema. And I think when you're talking about a very creative person, it's almost your duty not to use to be too conventional. I could have told the standard biographical picture, the history of this woman, Wilhelmina Barnes-Graham, but to be honest, her life wasn't full of ups and downs. I mean, she didn't have a great, a remarkable sex life, or she wasn't in the headlines. What was interesting was her inner life. And I think cinema, and the sort of cinema that I make, it tries to look at inner lives. What was somebody's imagination? How did they see the world? What excited them? What, when they went to see nature, the Alps or Orkney or St. Ives or Italy or Spain, what was it about those natural landscapes that dazzled them? And so you want to capture the passion, the inner passion of someone.
And of course, your collaboration with Tilda Swinton. I mean, she sort of doesn't need any introduction in any way. And also her voice itself, so distinctive. So how is it that you first came about working with her? And why was she just the perfect person to voice Wilhelmina?
Yeah, thank you. And so Tilda is a Scot, obviously, and I'm a Scot, and Willie Barnes-Graham was a Scot. So we all are from this part of the world. I first met Tilda through a common love of cinema, I think. I think we were at some art gallery and we went up and I think we just kissed each other briefly on the cheek and then walked away. That's my memory. Of course, Tilda is one of the great people in cinema, one of the great innovators and rethinkers. And so we've collaborated 5 times now on festivals, on stuff about children. We've tried to be wildly bold and daring and fun in China and Scotland. And this project, I needed somebody to do the voice of Willie, to read her diaries or notebooks. And I messaged Tilda and I said, what do you think of Willie Barnes-Graham? She said, I'm on fire for her. Technology is so good now. Tilda recorded her voice on her iPhone and it sounds really nice on a big screen. So it's always lovely to have her creative energy in a project.
100%. And I guess beyond working with Tilda, for you, I mean, you put a lot of yourself in the film, this isn't, you know, one of those where you sort of have a kind of a detachment, and, you know, going and getting the tattoo, etc., etc. What was your sort of experience on going on this journey? And, you know, how did that maybe change you? Or what did you personally discover for yourself that you weren't expecting to along that process?
Yeah, I felt infected by this artist. You know, she was infected, I think, by the glaciers when she climbed them in Switzerland, and I was infected by her. Somebody gets onto your skin sometimes, their way of seeing. I felt quite a few affinities, Sarah, between the way I see the world, which is quite grid-like and structured, and the way she sees the world, you know. And on the personal perspective, for a long time, I really disliked the sort of idea of the objective male voice, you know, like the sort of professorial thing. I've never been that. I've always been much more passionate and emotional in the way I deal with things, you know. So if you're making a film about this, you should be honest about your personal connection to the subject matter and not pretend to give a grand overview. You know, you want to be vulnerable, I think, and I hopefully this film is vulnerable in a way in that it's sort of amazed by this woman's art and how touching it is.
Along the process, did you have a particularly challenging moment? I mean, I guess there are some elements to it, so many different places.
I had one of the worst experiences in my life. When she climbed the glacier in 1949, it was down near the village of Grindelwald in Switzerland. Now, of course, it's almost gone. It's about 5% of what it was. So to get to the glacier, we had to climb several kilometers along a precipice, which felt about that wide. I've got terrible vertigo at the best times. Between us, we had several tripods, loads of batteries and lenses and cameras and everything. And to walk this precipice with like a half a kilometer drop to your right was really, really terrifying. I was so scared, white as a sheet. And then when we did the filming, and of course, when you're filming, you're in the zone, and we recreated her walk. And then I thought, we have to go down again. How do I go down this most terrifying thing? And then this sounds very stupid, but then I thought, I know what I'll do. I'll, in my head, not out loud, just in my head, I'll sing the song Edelweiss from The Sound of Music. And that's what it did. And singing that like a mantra got me down the hill. Of course, I can't hear it ever again because it'll bring me back to the terrifying trauma. But it was really, really scary, you know. And it's worth going through things like that, you know. They're memorable. You can feel your nervous system really shocked by it, but it's worth doing it, you know, for creativity.
And on the flip side, in the making of it, or when you watch the film back now, do you have a favorite moment, a favorite scene?
For a long time, I've been interested in aging, what happens as you get older, you know, and several of my films have been that. And so there's a bit towards the end of the film where I imagine the older Willoughby Barnes-Graham, let's say in her 80s, looking back to her younger self, that woman who climbed the Alps, and having an imaginary conversation. And the older Willie says to the younger woman, "You're happier than I am, but I am a better painter than you. I've seen more." And I think that's valuable because I feel myself, you know, that I've got better as a filmmaker as I've gone on. And more generally, I think quite universally, we can look back at our younger selves and think, who is that person? How much of them, that young person, remains in me?
And what do you hope people will take away from watching the film? And I guess it is kind of exploring creativity, different kinds of creativity, you know, definitely in the neurodiverse aspects, raising questions about climate change, and also how we do properly pay tribute to artists of the past that have been overlooked, particularly women. And it does feel like there's maybe a bit of a trend of kind of unearthing those, but there's probably so many more stories that we don't know yet. So what do you hope people take away?
You can see a lot of the art galleries feeling very guilty that they haven't had many women on their walls for a long time. So they're looking back into their collections and trying to see what great female artists. I suppose the thing that I would take away from this is that she kept painting right until the end of her life. She died when she was 91. The energy, the life force, You know, the unstoppability, the woman with no off button. That's a key thing, you know, that I would love people to take away. The energy of this. Another thing for, and this is valuable to whether people watching this are artists or just living their everyday lives, is that one of the lessons from her is she didn't try to be cool. She didn't try to follow fashion. She did her own thing. She plowed her own furrow, as it were, you know. And that's a great lesson. Don't try to be cool, because then, you know, that you're trying to be fashionable, then the fashion changes and suddenly you're left high and dry. So, you know, that kind of conviction of doing her own thing makes her look so admirable today.
And just finally, I mean, you mentioned, you know, how being prolific is obviously one of your sort of trademarks. What have you got next coming up? What are your sights set on?
I've just got a new book come out, which is called Dear Orson Welles and Other Essays, and it's me trying to look at cinema and directors, and I write about Nicole Kidman, and I write about Agnes Varda, and I write about older directors, but I also try to look at other questions about creativity. So that's just come out. And then I'm looking back at the whole history of documentary cinema and trying to say, what if we don't know how good it is? So there's a big 16-hour project and really diving into who were the great female documentarists and filmmakers from the Arab world, etc. There's a lot to this wonderful art form of documentary that we don't know about, and hopefully I can help bring it to attention.
Amazing. Well, can't wait to see that as well. And thank you so much for sharing all that with me. And I can't wait for everyone else to see this wonderful documentary. Thanks a lot.